Your website is your number one marketing tool. And if you have a beautiful website, but it's not attracting your ideal clients, what's the point in having it? Brighter Vision sees this happen all too often. As the world leaders in website design for therapists, Brighter Visions helps clients not only have a beautiful website that represents who you are, but they help you with the search engine optimization and all the other things that need to be done in order to bring people to your website and for them to be able to find you. So for 1 month free of Brighter Vision services, go over to brightervision.com/Gordon. That's brightervision.com/GORDON and try them out today. They will make a huge difference for you in your practice. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 83 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me here for the Practice of Therapy podcast. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. I'm so glad you're with me and letting me into your ears and into your life. And if you're a returning listener, thanks for listening again, and thanks for subscribing to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. It's here we are in June already, and it's hard to believe we're already done with the first week of June. Usually when I record the podcast, I usually do it on Fridays, just kind of one of the last things I do before the weekend. But, this past week, with it being the start of the month, I'm really kind of, turning the pages in my planner and just really kind of doing some, thinking ahead. And one of the things that I, have done, I've shared with many of you just kind of some of the family things going on with me. My dad we've had to put him into assisted living, and he's really in those end stages of life. And so having to deal with all of those things with my family. And then my wife, she broke her ankle back in March, and, she's literally just now getting back on her feet in terms of walking again and being able to put weight on that ankle and all of that sort of thing. So anyway, needless to say, I've gotten into some bad habits over the last few months. And one of those bad habits was I'd gotten away from exercising regularly. And so this week I accomplished a goal in that I've been walking every day in the mornings, which is my favorite time to go walk because it's just a way of just getting ready for the day. And one of the things I'm noticing is just already is my energy level, just not only physically, but also emotionally and mentally is much better just by doing that. I always kid around and say that I'm built for comfort, not for speed. And so, my weight has been something I've always struggled with, most of my adult life. And so, so I'm just getting back into some better habits. And, I always like to use the analogy of, one of the things I've shared in earlier episodes that is my brother and I, my brother Tim, who is in North Carolina, and I love my brother, my younger brother. He and I have done some backpacking trips and we kind of aspire to hike all of the sections of the Appalachian Trail through North Carolina and Tennessee. It's a big undertaking for some over 50 age guys, but anyway, I want to get back in shape for that. But I always think of the analogy, and I use this with my clients a good bit, is that, when you're walking along a trail like that, some parts of the trail are fairly easy hiking. Others are much more difficult and strenuous, and you just have to go slower at it and take your time with it. But the key thing is it's important to stay on the trail, because if you get off the trail, you can get yourself in trouble a good bit. And all of us, because we're human beings, will get off the trail. We'll get stuck in the weeds, and we'll get down off the trail. And I don't think it's a good idea to necessarily beat ourselves up or get down on ourselves for getting off the trail, because we learn a lot from that. Number one, but also it's more helpful just to get back on the trail and get back on track. And so the bad habits I've been in over the last few months, I'm really kind of working to get back on the trail, so to speak, and get back on track. So I just thought I'd commend that to you guys. The other thing that's happened this week is that I've with my list with my walking again, it's my opportunity to listen to podcasts again, and just have that time carved out and listen to. Sometimes I listen to Audible, and that's how I consume books and that sort of thing. But anyway, one of the things that I had went back and did is went back and listened to my first episode of the podcast. And I just kind of laughed. And in many ways, I'm just kind of, I wouldn't say embarrassed, but I just have to chuckle and think about how much I've learned since then, not only about podcasting and that sort of thing, but just about private practice in general, and how I do my own practice, and then how I'm doing the practice of therapy. And so, it tends to build on itself, and and I think that's the way we need to think about our practices. So in today's episode, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've learned so far, and hopefully this will be some helpful information for you, and as much as anything, inspire you to think about your own practice and doing things in a certain way. Real quickly before I move on to that, I do want to commend to you the Money Matters in Private Practice course. It's ready. There's the basic course is up there, and you can get that at practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. And also, when you go to that page, there's a free financial analysis guide, which is just a good starting place for really looking at the financial side of your practice and of private practice. And that's why I put that out there. So go over and take a look at that and download the free financial analysis guide. Hopefully it'll be helpful for you. The other thing around just kind of that topic real quickly is I'm real excited to be starting to do some more work with last week's guest, which is Julie Harris. She's an accountant that specializes in just working specifically with therapists. And so Julie and I are doing some collaborating, and we're going to be putting some bonus materials in with the course and that sort of thing. So that's another reason for me to commend that to you, and for you to get that on your radar screen, because I think it's going to be really helpful for folks in learning how to make their practices profitable and financially sound and financially sustainable and all that kind of stuff. So that was a lot again, but anyway, that's what's been on my mind this week. And so let's jump into here, talking about some of the things that I've learned so far about private practice, and just want to share those ideas with you. When I started my private practice, oh my gosh, let's see, nearly well over 10 years ago. Well, it was probably around 2005, 2006 when I started dipping my toe into private practice. I think I've shared with many of you that my story was, as I was working for an agency, I had kind of worked my way up through the ranks of the agency, and was working as a clinical consultant, really on strictly the clinical side of things with that agency. And then really figured out that I needed to take time to change some things, or really figured out that I wanted to change some things in terms of my lifestyle. My daughter had started into high school, and I was really looking forward to her being a part of the band and doing the band trips and all of that kind of fun stuff. And also at that time, around that time, my wife had developed some health issues, and we were having to deal with her, recovery from breast cancer and all those kinds of yucky things. So I really needed to free up my time. And so that was the point at which I said, okay, I need to really figure out a way to be my own boss. And, like most people that go into private practice, I was pretty apprehensive about that, but I knew that I'd seen other people do it and knew of other people that had gone into private practice. And so I really came up with the maybe the resolve at that time that I was going to figure out how to do that. So, I've learned a lot over this period of time. And as you've heard me say many times before, I've learned a lot the hard way. Don't want you to necessarily have to do that, but sometimes we need to do that. And it's okay if we make mistakes and we then learn from our mistakes. But here's some, just wanted to share with you a few things that I've just kind of taken note of and really kind of figured out along the way. And these aren't in really any particular order. I was just had jotted down, I was making some notes this morning and really kind of jotted down some things that came to mind for me and just thinking about the things that I've learned. First of all is just understand that being in business, being in private practice is an ongoing process. It's not one of those things where you just set it and forget it, as they like to say. I think that's a Ron Papel saying, set it and forget it. And you really can't approach it that way. There's constant change, just like with life. If you think about it, for those of us that have had children or have children, there's a constant flux of change with things that as they develop and move into older age, you adjust to those things. So one of the things that I would say in being in private practice is embrace the idea that you're not going to be able to just get all these things in place and set it and then just be a static thing that doesn't change. You're going to constantly be changing things, constantly updating things. And I would say just allow yourself to embrace that understanding. The other thing too, and this kind of came up in my topic as a topic really in my mastermind group, the Getting Started mastermind group that's currently going on. We started talking about electronic health record systems and going paperless and all of those kinds of things. And, I think one of the things that I heard from some of the group members is they were looking for the best way to do that particular thing. There are a lot of electronic health record systems out there. Some of them are really good, some not so good. The one that I kind of endorse is TherapyNotes. They're, obviously, just full disclosure, they're one of the sponsors of this podcast, but I also use them in my practice. So I use them because I feel like they're a good product, and that's one of the reasons I promote them. But, there's a lot of others out there as well. And I'm not, and I think my point with this is find the one that works best for you. Use what is going to fit your style, is going to fit your way of doing things and the way you like to do them. And there's no exact correct way of doing things. That's the beauty of being in private practice, is that you get to decide how you want to do things and you get to decide how you want to do it. And I think one of the things that I think tends to hold people back is they look for the exact right way to do things. And we want to do things correctly, but the truth of the matter is there's no one correct way. Do it the way you want to do it and be happy with that. The other thing that related to that I'd jotted down in my notes, depending on what stage you are in your practice, if you're just getting started, or if you're just kind of in that growth phase where you've already started and you're building your client base, or you're really in that next phase of kind of a scaling phase where you're thinking about maybe adding clinicians or forming a group practice. One of the things about that is that be flexible with yourself around the way things change. And that the other thing is don't measure your beginning point where you are now to somebody else's middle. It might be that you just haven't grown to that point yet. There are a lot of very successful private practice consultants out there. A lot of them are good friends of mine. And one of the things I like about this space is the fact that we all tend to be so collaborative and try to help each other out with this. But if I measure what I'm doing against what somebody else is doing, I'm going to create a lot of anxiety for myself, because some of the people out there have been doing it a long time. My friend Joe Sanok, for example, he's pretty well known, and does a brilliant job with what he does. But if I get hung up on trying to compare myself to the way he does things, it's gonna quickly, I might get discouraged. I might just kind of feel like, oh, well, I'll never measure up to that. And I guess what I've learned is kind of shy away from doing that. Do what you want to do and do it in your way, and don't measure what you're doing against somebody else. Certainly learn from others and learn how the other ways that people do things, but you get to do it in your way. And that was another thing too, is that when we were in my mastermind group, we were just talking about the different ways that we handle intakes and the way that we handle our paperwork and intake packets and that sort of thing. And all of us in the group had a different way of doing it. And I think the one thing that I learned in that is that you do it your way. You do what works for you. If you want to have a paperless office, you can do it that way. That makes sense, if that makes sense for you. But there are some people out there that still just prefer to do low tech and do paperwork, So, and if you choose to do that, that's perfectly all right. And so I guess that's my message, is that you do it in your way. One of the other things that I've really kind of learned along the way is that, at least for me, is to learn to celebrate the small wins. In other words, in many ways, not necessarily go for these huge growth. Let me explain what I mean. One of the things that is real easy to do is to be distracted by other people's shiny objects. I think one of the things that we're just kind of inundated with in our society is that somehow or another this concept that bigger is better, and that if you we look at people's wealth, it's kind of like, oh, they're a millionaire, or success is measured somehow or another by some sort of magic number out there, or in other words, some sort of figure. And one of the things that I've really kind of figured out and learned along the way is, your lifestyle is important, and how you live your life, and the comfort level that you want with all of that is more important than really kind of going after the shiny objects. I think a lot of us have probably run into people along the way that are really kind of, for lack of a better term, they like to be kind of flashy. I think about there was a guy in my town I grew up in. He always had a new car, and it was always a big car, and it had a lot of chrome and flashy and that sort of thing. And he was one of these guys that wore a lot of gold jewelry and that sort of. You get the picture anyway of that kind of thing. There's a southern saying about that. They have a big cowboy hat but no cows. But anyway, I think my point being is that I think a lot of times there's an allure around money and wealth and just having all of those big shiny objects. And we can do that in our practices. We can compare our practice to somebody else's. and be discouraged by that. But find the right size practice for you. Find what fits for you and your lifestyle. I'll give you an example of that. My good friend Casey Compton is a very successful therapist and entrepreneur. She has got a multi-million-dollar practice. She hires and has about over 80 employees now. She's probably, I would guess now, I haven't talked to Casey here directly recently, but Casey has got probably, I think, at least 5 locations now. And she's really built this wonderful thing and has created just a wonderful place for a lot of people to work. And I'm so glad she's out there because I learned so much from her. But I don't aspire to have anything that big. Number one, my age, I just don't want to take on something that big at this point in my life. And my point is that think about things in that way. Do what is right for you. I know I'm kind of repeating this, but I think one of the things that can happen is we can really be not deluded, but distracted by the big things. And don't compare, like I said earlier, don't compare your beginning place or where you want to be with somebody else. Pick your own place there. One of the things a quick story here about a client I had at one time. Loved this client. He was just a great guy. And one of the things about him that I knew that he had kind of shared with me is that he had kind of amassed a lot of wealth over a period of time. And so I kind of asked him about that. I said, well, how did you do that? And he said he was a person that had done, not necessarily, he'd done some flipping of houses and real estate and that kind of thing, which was great. But the one take-home point I got, or the big thing I got from him, is that he did things in small increments. In other words, he wasn't looking to do like we see on, we watch a lot of home and garden television. He wasn't one of these guys that would make like $50,000 or $100,000 on the flipping of a house. He would go for these small wins. He would go for the small amounts, like make $2,000 or $3,000 on a real estate deal, and then he would take that money and just reinvest it into the business. And so that was just something that just really caught my attention, and I thought about that in terms of my practice, in that it was better for me to just work on making my practice profitable. And it didn't have to be a huge profit, but I would take those small wins and then add those together over time. And so I think that's, again, one of the things that I've learned is that slow growth, small growth can be just as satisfying and lucrative as to having some kind of big, huge growth. So if you're thinking about, if you're just getting started in private practice, or maybe your practice is at a place where you're maybe feeling a struggle financially or whatever, think about just breaking it down into small wins rather than going for the big wins or trying to make this huge leap. Another thing that I tell my clients all the time, and I'm sure you've had clients like this too, they come in and they bring this stuff that is just, you start hearing the details of their life and you're thinking, oh my gosh, if that were me, I'd be overwhelmed too. And they're just totally overwhelmed. But I think when we get overwhelmed, the best strategy is just to break things down into smaller pieces. Just do one thing at a time. The metaphor I like to use for that is that if you could imagine having your garage crammed full of stuff all the way to the ceiling, and you were tasked with cleaning that garage up and reorganizing it. If you did that, if you were to tackle that, you would just do one item at a time. You'd start in one corner or one place, and you'd start taking everything out and then deciding what to do with it a piece at a time. And so I think one of the things about building a private practice is just concentrate on one thing at a time. Just work on the little things one at a time. Again, that was one of the things that came up in our mastermind group today, was just one of the members of the group was just talking about all the different things she was trying to figure out. And I think her big take home point from what we talked about was just concentrate on what she has now and get that working well, rather than trying to figure out, okay, what's the next big thing that I need to do, and what do I need to do to make my processes better, and do I need to get a different software or different system in place, and that sort of thing. And her big take home was just, okay, just make what I'm doing now work really well. And so I think that's the other thing to consider, and just thinking about private practice. The other thing that I will say that I wish I had, that I've learned along the way, is that I tried to do a lot of times over the years too much on my own. And I think that's one of the things that I wish I had done sooner, was to outsource some things sooner, and also reach out to others that are in this space that are private practice owners, and network with those people. I wish I had done that sooner. I think, there is one of the things that I've mentioned in other podcast episodes earlier. One of the things I wish I would have done sooner was to hire a consultant to consult with, hire somebody or talk with someone that was farther ahead in the process than I was, and talk with them and learn from them. And I think there's a huge case for that. I know every time that I've done that, and every time that I've really done some consulting with someone, is I have it has just pushed me ahead much faster. Not that, again, I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth. Not that moving ahead fast is important, but I've really kind of gotten back on the trail quicker, is a better way to put that, by doing some consulting and talking to someone that has been there ahead of you. So, if you're ever interested in talking with me about consulting and doing some individual one-on-one work, intensive work, I love doing that. I love working with people in that way. So that's one thing I would say that I've learned along the way that I wish I had done more of sooner. And one final thought on just kind of things that I've learned, and this is, in many ways, I'm just kind of repeating some of what I've said already, but I think one of the things is to really give yourself permission to be in it for the long haul. As I said earlier, this is a process. You're going to learn things along the way. You're going to figure out that there's going to be other ways of doing this whole private practice thing. Just think about how you've changed. Maybe think about from when you first started out into this field, how much you've learned along the way, depending on where you are in your journey. I think back when I first started seeing clients, when I was in graduate school and was doing my practicums and internships and stuff, and just how nervous I felt about being in the therapy room with people. And I just wanted to do everything correctly and say exactly the right things. Now, when I go into the therapy room, that is not even on my radar screen. Part of it is just I've been doing it a long time, feel confident in what I do, and I know what works and doesn't work with my style and the way I do things. But my point being is that you will learn along the way, like I have learned along the way, and just embrace that and be ready to be in it for the long haul. It's an ongoing journey. It's an ongoing process, and it's cumulative, and it's just a great thing. And so, the other thing about that is just be persistent and consistent with what you're doing. That, I think, is one of the things that has contributed to my success in private practice more than anything, is that I just made up my mind that that's what I wanted to do, and I was gonna I was just going to do it, grab hold and do it. And, I've been through those periods, which I'm sure some of you listening out there might be in this place where you're just thinking, okay, what have I done? Is this really what I wanted to do? Really what I wanted to do? I can remember moments exactly like that back when I was working for an agency. I think it was about 6 months in, and we were working with some very difficult cases, and I was still kind of a new therapist, and I was thinking, what have I done? I've gone in the wrong direction, but boy, I'm glad I stuck it out. And I think that's true for this profession of really, if you've got the heart for it, if you truly want to help others, you truly want to make a difference in people's lives, just stick it out and you will learn along the way. So, that was a lot. And, I hope this has been helpful for you in just thinking about those things. So be persistent and consistent in what you do. Understand that it's an ongoing process. The other bullet points I guess I've got here are just do what works best for you. Learn from your mistakes. Treat all of your mistakes and things that you might failures along the way as just learning moments and learning ways of learning. That's a good way to approach it. Be flexible. Be willing to change things. Not every direction is a good direction, and so be willing to change those things up. The other thing too is don't measure your beginning point against somebody else's middle. Don't try too hard to compare your practice to someone else's. And also, I would say learn to outsource and reach out to others sooner. One huge game changer in my practice was when I hired a virtual assistant to start, or just hired an assistant to start handling the phone calls and doing the intakes and all of that. Huge game changer for me. Took so much off my plate. Also just with all of the stuff that I'm doing with the practice of therapy, I've outsourced a lot of what I'm doing now. I'm so thankful to Rachel. Thanks, Rachel. You're listening to this, I know, for all that she does and helping me get the podcast out every week and get this information out to people. So learn to outsource sooner. Don't put it off too long. Certainly if you're in those starting phases, you bootstrap, but that was the other thing. So, okay, so I'm going to stop now. I know that was a lot, and I appreciate you listening to my ramblings on that, but hopefully this has been helpful information for you and just thinking about the things that I've learned so far in private practice. Well, folks, I hope these thoughts and ideas that I put together today and for this episode of the podcast are helpful for you. I do it really just as just out of a desire to really help people and be encouraging and maybe inspiring in many different ways. Going into the professions that we've chosen here as helping helpers and helping professions. People come to us day in and day out in this profession, and they pour their hearts out to us. And for me, I know that is sometimes very difficult work, but it's also very rewarding work. And so I admire you for having chosen this profession and gone into, being a counselor, a therapist, social worker, psychologist, whatever sort of helping profession that you're in. I'm just kudos to you for having gone in this direction. And I really do feel that it is not only noble work, but in many ways for me personally, sacred work. And so, thanks for doing what you do. And I'm so glad you've joined me in this journey and that you're listening in. And again, as I've said many times before, I hope that this information is helpful to you and inspirational to you. So do take the time to go over and check out today's podcast sponsor, Brighter Visions. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, if you'll go over to brightervision.com/Gordon, that's just brightervision.com/Gordon, Gordon, and use the coupon code Gordon, and you can get 1 month free of their services. Perry and his whole team, that they just do a wonderful job at helping people with their websites and getting them to where they are performing well, but also bring you the clients that you want to have, bringing you your ideal clients. So go check them out. And also I commend to you again the Money Matters in Private Practice course that's out there and ready for you. It's at practiceoftherapy.com/money matters. And go take a look at that. Also, when you go to that page, that URL I just mentioned, there's you can get a free download there, the financial analysis guide, and that'll just get you started in thinking about the financial side of private practice and give you a way to kind of measure where you are, which can be a scary thing for some people, but it's a good starting point. So I commend that to you. And also, on the website at practiceoftherapy.com, if you'll go in there to where it just says cool resources, there's a button right there on the front page. Got lots of other resources and things that I recommend, and tools that I've either put together or tools that I recommend for others. So that's there, and just recommend that to you. Thank you guys for supporting the podcast, and thanks for being there and listening to the podcast. Hope you have a good rest of your week or weekend whenever you might be listening to this. Take care, folks. You have been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free Private Practice Startup Guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.